Hi, welcome back. And in this episode, something a little bit different. Now, I've been designing cars for over 30 years. Half of that has been dedicated mostly to the very high-end supercars, hypercars. The public doesn't see or even get to experience these types of cars. I'm going to show you today 8 cars that I feel carry a lot of design value for the buck. I've set my budget for about £5,000. Of course, at this price, you're not going to find anything new, but what you will find is some hidden gems. And hopefully there'll be some things in there to surprise you. Number 1 is the best-selling 2-seater convertible sports car in history. And that is the Mazda MX5, also known as the Miata. There is a lot of influence of the Italians, of the British sports cars of the 50s and 60s. The concept when it came out was it was bringing something refreshing back to the market. So let's refer specifically to the first generation because we know there are 4 generations in this car. And the first one is what really does it for me. I mean, if you look at the front of this car, pop-up headlights for me are classic design. They pull you back a little bit in history. Secretness, but still a little bit coy, you know, kind of timid in that little way there. Where it nails it, where it really gets it right in a design sense, is in what we call classic proportions. But everything is like a classic tailored suit, you know? There's nothing that is gonna upset you with this design. It walks a fine line, as we say in design, between being masculine and feminine. But it's that kind of car that you would just enjoy on a Sunday afternoon, driving out in the countryside, wind in your hair, grit flying around you. It's what real road cars, real sports cars, real roadsters are all about. However, this design is not bold. It's not, let's call it memorable either. However, I think if you can get one for under $2,000, this is definitely a steal. Now my second choice is the Saab 900, and this is a car that was introduced in the late 70s up until the mid 90s, around there. And now this car for me represents something, you know, coming in from left field, I'd say, because the design is probably a love it or hate it. Basically, the shape of the car is what really strikes me as being unusual. They have a lot of quirky solutions on this car that work really well. I mean, if you look across that deeply curved front windscreen, it gives the driver excellent visibility. The engine itself, I mean, you open that very interesting opening bonnet and you can see the engine. And why I'm pointing that out is because the engine's actually mounted backwards to what we usually are accustomed to seeing, so it's almost in a reverse position. The doors for me are very special. The way the cut line goes all the way down right into the rocker panel or the sill panel, that is very special on the car. And the back having this kind of interesting, almost a negative slope to it, which I found really, really interesting as a contrast. Very Scandinavian, again, very clean, purposeful design. So in our research, we found that you could probably get one of these for around 700 pounds, all the way up to maybe around 3,000 pounds. And again, if you can find one in that price segment, I would just nab it. It's a steal because this car is only going to feel more classic as the years go by. So if you thought we were a little bit coming from left field with a Saab 900, you might as well click off now because we're going way into the danger zone with my third pick, the Renault Aventine. So this car on first look might actually repulse you. When I go to the front view of this car, it's got a Renault badge on it, and that's about all it has on it that tells you that it's a Renault. Now it is a strange looking car, and you could almost say it's a modern French interpretation of perhaps the Fiat Multipla, which we also know is rather strange. The Aventine has a little bit more refinement to it. I would even say it's even more almost of a product design than it is of a, say, a transportation or a car design. Kind of looks to me like it was designed by an architect. Well, look at it. I mean, it's got glass everywhere on this thing. Great visibility any way you look. The graphics on this car in that area around the C-pillar are surely unusual. I'm not sure what the intent was with the C-pillar, but it does give it sort of a architectural look. I mean, modern architecture, obviously. This is something that Norman Foster could have designed. There is a cohesiveness to the design if you look at it. That makes sense. Again, that rear windscreen, I mean, it's got incredible amount of curvature, amount of wrap to it. It's distinctive. And those taillights, I've never seen taillights like that before. Again, quirkiness, but in a very kind of industrial way. For all intents and purposes, this should be a monstrosity, but for me, somehow it works. What is that? It's like you never saw one of these in your life, did you? This car was designed in the 90s as a vision of what the future would look like. And granted, they were miles off. You know, we'll be seeing these kind of cars in the next millennium. So if you can pick one up now for a good price, I think it's going to be a pretty smart investment. Don't forget, I have all the sketches from my YouTube channel, How I Design series, available now online. So the fourth car on my list is one of the best roadsters in the world ever. Back in the early 90s, Porsche was in dire straits and they definitely needed a hit. So they turned to Grant Larson. Anybody in design knows Grant Larson in the automotive industry. Grant is a superstar. So they did a car, they presented it at the Detroit Auto Show in 1993, I believe. And the car was a huge hit. You know, the engine typically on a Porsche, these type of vehicles, it's in the back. This car has it mounted in the middle, so you can do a design that basically makes the car a little bit more balanced, I would say, over the wheels. So Grant has managed to do that very well. Now, what he's also done, very interestingly, is tweak the design look of the headlights to achieve a look that was very distinctive for Porsche. It's what I call a cracked egg. Now, if you look at the headlamp of that Porsche Boxster, you'll see that it does incorporate the ovalness of the Porsche headlamp, and towards the bottom it is, like I said, a cracked egg. It starts to spill out. So not only are you getting a design that is sexy as hell, but you're getting all the luxury that is associated with the Porsche mark. So if you can find one under $5,000, that is absolutely a deal. And for my fifth design, this one's going to be a little bit hard to find, because if you do find it for under $5,000, it probably won't be there tomorrow. And if it's still there, it probably doesn't run at all. So keep an eye out for this one, the Honda CRX. I love the front end of it. It's very clean. Again, Honda-esque. This car was almost the start of the, let's call it that size car, where it started to look a little bit more fast just sitting there. What really turns me on is it's got kind of like the pocket rocket kind of feel to it, where if you want the car to look like something that goes a lot faster than it actually does. The rear end is very special because they've been able to put in a lot of glass in that rear end, and that gives it a very airy feeling to the back. And I especially like how they put the vertical glass plane on the back. It gives a really good looking out back view. It's very clean. It's a very no frills design, balanced very well in terms of design. If you were to try to improve a design like this, you'd probably radically have to change it, because right out of the box it looks great. A lot of people will take these cars and start to customize them and modify them and add things to the body to make it even look more aggressive, more appealing to their tastes. So this car under $5,000 is definitely a deal, and under $10,000 too. So my sixth car is a classic, and this car has gone on to prove that good design can last a long time. The designer of this car is a very special designer. If you know a little bit about the history of Volkswagen, the Beetle was tapering off in sales. They needed a car to replace the Beetle, and Volkswagen approached said designer, and that car that he designed is the Volkswagen Mark I Golf. And that designer is Giorgio Giugiaro of Ital Design. He had to stick to a strict engineering package, and he did that. And of course, using a similar design language that he had used before for example, the Lotus Esprit. He did the Maserati Quattroporta back in the early 60s. He did the BMW M1. He did the DeLorean, the DMC-12 they called that. He did away with all those flowing surfaces that we'd seen in the 60s, those really nice, you know, almost sensual design surfacing. And he went for this much stricter design language. The proportions of the car, still very tight, very small, but that very strong C-pillar, especially on the four-door version, you can see that very, very strong C-pillar. In the rear, you see those nice square headlights. In the back, very defining for that car. Again, the car for me is still identifiable as the first stepping stone, the first building block for the Golf range, which I like still to this day. I think the Golf today is one of the nicest looking cars in that segment on the market, and Giugiaro did it all from scratch in the sense that he came up with this new defining design language. All in all, what I like about this design is that it was probably one of the first cars to mark what we could call a paradigm shift when he introduced it. In other words, it was the new movement of design. So if you can find one of these for under $5,000, it's going to be the cheapest icon you will ever find. Now, the seventh car in my selection, the guy who designed it was actually the guy who hired me. He eventually became the head of design of BMW. Before that, he was the lead designer on this project, which is the E30 BMW 3 Series. And for me, that car, it's a BMW. I mean, everything about the car for me says BMW. It looks super elegant and dynamic. It's classy and sporty at the same time. Every cue that you know of or recognize as being BMW is in that car. You take the double headlamps on either side, you take the grille, which is beautifully proportioned, split between the two of them. You take the lines that go simply through the side of the car, just adding that a little bit of amount of tension. You get that beautiful Hofmeister kink, or knick in German. You get that really pure rear end on this car. It's nice. And the bumpers, obviously classic for that time of its period, chrome and that. But the car, I think, to this day, still looks elegant, beautiful, sporty, light on its feet. I would love to have one of these cars in my collection. If you find one of these cars, I would say jump, get it, and keep it. And the eighth and final car is my design. This car today still looks very fresh, very modern. It holds those values that the original Mini had, and it's been able to interpret them in a way that is still appealing to a huge segment of the public. The Cooper S was the most fun to design. I think it's a great combination of the emotion of the past with the technology of the future. It captures, like I said, the emotion, but it pushes it a little bit further in the sense that this car is the big brother of the Mini brand, of the Cooper brand. It's hard for me to critique it in a critical way because I'm responsible for all of it and I've chosen to do it this way. But I think the simplicity of the design, the logicness of the design, the attention to detail of the design all work really well on this car. And again, that sort of layered look where you have the roof, then you have the glass area, and then you have the body area. Those three coming together work very well together. It's kind of like a three-tiered cake. Things like the door handles, the Monza type fuel cap on the side, those little things give it a little bit of exquisiteness that I think is rare to see in a car of that segment there. So for $5,000, you could probably afford to pick up a couple of these, maybe even a few of these. But at the same time, what I'm trying to say is this car looks a heck of a lot more expensive than it actually is. And that's always a good sign when you're buying something and you get more than you pay for. And there you have it. That concludes my episode of 8 affordable cars with beautiful designs. Let me know in the comments below if any of you have picked up a car for under $5,000 that meets those targets. Affordable and beautiful. I'd love to hear from you. And if anybody's selling one of these cars for under $5,000, please let me know.